What's going on, everyone? Welcome into Falcons Today. Coming up on our show, we're going to talk about the latest roster moves as Atlanta signed a player and put another player on IR. Plus, we're going to talk about the possibility of Matty Ice coming back. I've seen a lot of chatter on the streets about the Falcons bringing him back, or maybe we're just wishful thinking, if you will. So we will address that at the second half of the show. But let's get into the roster moves as the Falcons signed defensive tackle Eli Ankou, and then they put wide receiver Josh Ali on injured reserve to open up a roster spot. So let's start things off by getting to know the newest member of the Falcons' 53-man roster. A bit of a familiar face. He had 2 stints with Atlanta back in May and August of 2021. Former UDFA out of UCLA, he has bounced around the entire NFL. He's been living out of a suitcase his entire career pretty much. But most recently, he was in Buffalo on the Bills practice squad where I think he's had the most success in his NFL career. He has 3 starts in his NFL career, 33 games played. When you look at his career stats, they're not going to jump off the page. 43 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. I mean, compare those numbers to most people on the practice squad. That is way better than a lot of other guys in the league. But ultimately, Atlanta adds a little bit more depth to their defensive line. We have Calais Campbell, David Onyemata, and Grady Jarrett all sort of hitting their groove right now. I mean, David Onyemata, I think, played his best game as a Falcon last time out against Jacksonville. Calais Campbell has been rock solid, and we know Grady Jarrett is always going to play at a Pro Bowl level. Ultimately, like I said, the Falcons wanted to add some depth on their defensive line because I think they want to deepen their rotation a little bit. I was looking at the 2023 snaps so far for Atlanta's defensive linemen, and it surprised me, honestly. Grady Jarrett is playing at 70% of snaps. That's a high level for a guy at a defensive line. I mean, that's a lot of wear and tear early in the season. Calais Campbell is at 62%. David Onyemata is at 60%. So those 3 guys are doing a lion's share of the work. Then you've got Zach Harrison and Taquan Grant coming in next at 29 and 27%. So ultimately, I think Terry Fontenot and Ryan Nielsen realized that running our 3 defensive linemen at 60+% snap-wise for the entire season is probably not super duper sustainable. And if we want to give these guys some breathers, we need to deepen our defensive line and our depth. So they bring a guy on who's got some NFL experience and who's been with the Falcons, at least in the offseason, twice. But speaking of the defense, I do want to hear from everyone watching. What would you grade Atlanta's defense thus far? A, B, C, D, or F? I'm not quite ready to give it an A. I think no one's at an A just yet. I mean, there are some better defenses out there, but I'd give it a solid B. And I think giving it a B 4 weeks in is probably not something we expected, given how they played last season. The pass rush by committee starting to come along. They've got 6 players who have recorded at least half a sack. Jesse Bates is tied for the league for interceptions with 3. A.J. Terrell is putting guys on an island. I think this defense is at a B right now. All right. As for the other roster move Atlanta made, Josh Ali was placed on injured reserve. He was the last wide receiver on this depth chart, former UDFA out of Kentucky. And the Falcons currently roll with just 4 wide receivers, if I'm counting correctly, going into week 5. This number might change. You could see someone get elevated from the practice squad. Drake London, Matt Collins, Scotty Miller, and Kadero Hodge are the lone 4 wide receivers, but that's probably not going to stay that way for too much longer. All right, before we get on to the next segment here, which is all about bringing back Matty Ice, I think my tone of voice kind of says how I feel about this. But really quickly, today's show is sponsored by Game Time. Game Time, well, you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. If you're trying to catch an upcoming Falcons game, or you want to go to a Braves playoff game, or another sporting event in your area, Game Time is the place to visit first. What I love about Game Time specifically is the ability to get last-minute tickets for the lowest price. I had a wedding for a friend in Atlanta last week. The Cubs were in town, so I went to the Braves-Cubs game, and they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets over at Game Time. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. Plus, you can get an awesome bird's eye view of what your seat will look like before you even purchase your tickets. So there are no surprises when you show up to the stadium and you know what you're looking at here. So It's the place to find last-minute seats. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code FalconsChat for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code FalconsChat for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So let's talk about Matt Ryan for a moment. And I don't want to pick on one site or person particularly because I saw one article, but this was just like the final straw that broke the camel's back for me. And this one comes from Blogging Dirty. Are the Atlanta Falcons going to sign legendary quarterback Matt Ryan? And no offense to Blogging Dirty, like I said, a lot of people have been talking about maybe Matt Ryan should come back to Atlanta, right? Good offense, easy division. Can we get a little bit out of Matty Ice? My only question is, which side do you have a more difficult time convincing to make this happen? The Falcons or Matt Ryan? Because I don't think either party would be interested in this right now, right? It's more or less a new era. It's a new front office for the Falcons compared to what Matt Ryan had there for much of his career. He did briefly overlap with Arthur Smith, so it's not completely foreign to them, but they have gone a different direction. And Matt Ryan, I mean, when the Jets lost Aaron Rodgers, there was very little interest from his side, it sounded like, or his agent, for Matt Ryan to come out of retirement and join New York. The only way I could see Matt Ryan actually coming back to the Falcons would be if Atlanta is, week 18, clinching a playoff spot, and their quarterback, Desmond Ridder, got hurt, and they're like, damn, we just had the, wind taken out of our sails here. Can we bring back Matt Ryan, and maybe he can help us for the last couple of weeks? That would be the only path I could see Matt Ryan actually coming back to the Falcons. Now, there is something to Atlanta's offense hitting a brick wall the last 2 weeks. Compare the first 2 weeks of the season to the second 2 weeks. I mean, points per game, 24.5 down to 6.5. Just one touchdown over the last 8 quarters. Total yards has fallen off a cliff, 100 less yards. Passing yards is down. Rushing yards went way down. And maybe saddest of all, 5 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks, just 1 touchdown, like I said, in the next 2 weeks. And turnovers are way up. This is a bad 2-week slump, but I'm prepared to say it's just that. It's a 2-week slump. The NFL is a long season. I know it might not feel that way because you only get 17 cracks at it, but calendar-wise, it is a long season. So I think bringing back, let's call it washed Matt Ryan because of a 2-week slump might be on the Mount Rushmore of overreaction. Sure, the fan in all of us would love to see Matt Ryan come in on a white stallion and lead Atlanta to the postseason. Like, that would be perfect, but that's not going to happen. So let's stop trying to make that happen because the reality is he's not coming back, and he's not coming back the way he looked in 2016 or 17 or anything like that. And Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heinicke are the only 2 quarterbacks on this roster. You might see a trade, but that's unlikely. So for the time being, let's not panic after 2 weeks and demand Matt Ryan comes out of retirement. I think that's just too big of an overreaction. If you want to have a quarterback change, sure. If it's on the roster, that's much more feasible. But to get Matt Ryan out of the CBS broadcast booth and get him on a Falcons sideline in a helmet, pads, and jersey next week, that's just not going to happen. So make sure, by the way, you subscribe so you do not miss this Sunday's watch party because producer Rolly and myself will be live for this week's game against the Houston Texans. So do not miss a thing when it comes to Falcons watch parties all season long. To kind of put a bow on the Matt Ryan segment here, don't look if you do not want what's a lot of great memories for Falcons fans tarnished because the last few years for Matty Ice, they have not been good. I mean, he was dreadful in Indianapolis, unfortunately. 14 touchdowns, 13 interceptions. His last year in Atlanta was not his best work, 20 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. He is far from what he was doing for that 2016 to 2019, even 2020 stretch. Now, what you do have is Taylor Heinicke and Desmond Ridder on this roster. So if we want to have a conversation about Heinicke taking over from Ridder, that is a much more appropriate conversation. Taylor Heinicke on the left, you can see what he did in 9 starts for the Commanders last season. Exact same completion percentage of Desmond Ridder through the first 4 games of this year, but the 12 touchdowns in 5 more games, so that's definitely something to factor in. But even if Desmond Ridder was on pace for 9 games, he would not be at 12 touchdowns. So the yards per game is down. statistically, it somewhat favors Taylor Heinicke. And if the roles were reversed, if Atlanta drafted Taylor Heinicke and Desmond Ridder came over from Washington, who would be starting week 1? I would think Heinicke. But because Ridder was drafted by the Falcons, they want to see how their guy turns out, right? They want to see if that was a successful pick or not. And so Desmond Ridder is going to get the benefit of the doubt. But pick a quarterback for me, Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heinicke. Type DR for Desmond Ridder, type TH for Taylor Heinicke down below in the comment section. I'll tell you what I want, and that is I don't want to see flip-flop at quarterback. I don't want to see Michael Scott snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap, right? Pick a quarterback and stick with him the rest of the season. If you want to roll with Desmond Ridder for the rest of the way, okay. If you want to change midway through, that's also fine with me. But if you do change and you do go to Taylor Heinicke, stick with Taylor Heinicke. Because I don't know a team that's ever won a playoff game with 3 unique starting quarterbacks in a season, meaning going from quarterback A to quarterback B back to quarterback A without an injury, right? If you bench Desmond Ridder and then go back to him later on, that just seems like a recipe for disaster. I remember the Bears did it, like somewhat because of the Falcons too, where they went from Mitch Trubisky to Nick Foles, or Nick Foles came in for Mitch Trubisky against the Falcons, and then went back to Mitch. They did not win a playoff game that year. So no, I'm not interested in a snip, snap, snip, snap. Pick one, whenever that is, and then stick with that guy the rest of the way. That's going to do it for us on this edition of Falcons Today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, as always. Really appreciate those of you that watch all the way to the end of the video. So if you did watch all the way to the end of the video, drop a rise up for me down in the comment section. It's a good way for me to figure out who the MVPs of the channel are.